The siege of the White House, day one, it's a bust. We're going to talk about it on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. I am in downtown Washington, D.C., just a couple blocks from the White House. And the reason I'm here is because there was supposed to be a really big riot here today. And I'm talking thousands of Antifa, you know, those kind of Black Lives Matter, that kind of thing, rioting down here in Lafayette Park. You can see behind me the preparations that many storefronts have been making all over Washington, D.C. in the downtown area here. The shopkeepers, a lot of them had their windows smashed, you know, in the riots that happened right after the George Floyd incident. And many of them just boarded up their windows and left them that way. Some of them have replaced their windows now and are boarding them up so that they don't lose another set. But so I have to explain where this riot that was supposed to take place came from. They called it the siege of the White House, and it was supposed to be 50 days of rioters and looters and protesters laying siege to the White House down here in Lafayette Square. However, it may not come to fruition. Now, there's a couple of weird things about this particular event that I'll bring up in a minute. But first, you need to understand that the White House is taking it seriously. There are a lot of police around this area. Now, they're being very covert, and they are not right down in the square, although there are some down there. But the majority of the police are on side streets 2 or 3 blocks away from where the protest is supposed to take place in Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is right in front of the White House. So if you haven't been down here before, let me describe it to you. I'm about to arrive at Lafayette Square. Lafayette Square is right in front of the White House. There's one street that separates it from the White House. That's been a pedestrian street for a long time, and that's typically where you find the majority of your, you know, protests. There's always protests going on down there about one thing or another. It's always something, right? Now, because of the incredible amount of, you know, violent protests that we've seen down here in recent weeks, the Park Service has actually placed a giant, like 10-foot metal fence all the way around Lafayette Square. And we're going to see that here in just a second once I can get across the street. Right now I'm going to just walk down one more block because I want you to see this wall behind me. So there's some construction going on in this. This is the building right across from Lafayette Square. So the sidewalk I'm standing on, you see back behind me that street. You can see the fence back there. And behind the fence is Lafayette Square. Behind that is another pedestrian street, and then the White House, okay? So you can see the unbelievable amount of graffiti and protest signs and things like that that have been affixed to this construction wall behind me. It's really kind of an amazing work of art in a way. It's kind of an amazing collage of protest literature, protest sloganeering, profanity, and names of those who have been killed and that sort of thing. So pretty amazing. Now, I think I can get across over to Lafayette Square now. Like I say, they put this big 10-foot fence all the way around it This was not here the last time I was here. And the reason is because I think they're preparing to be able to actually close the park completely if the riots, were to come in here and get too bad. So this fence right here is the fence I'm talking about. And it is just like the fence they had in Portland at the federal courthouse there. It's about 10 feet high. It's heavy, expanded metal mesh. It's held down by concrete jersey walls in here and welded together and then bolted together as well. And again, you can see that they've affixed lots of protest signs and pictures and things like that to this fence also. Now I'm going to go into Lafayette Square here because I want to show you what they've done here as well. Now remember, there was supposed to be literally thousands of protesters here right now. The rain probably kept a few of them away, but it's not raining that hard. So the question is, why aren't they here? Well, they announced on Twitter earlier today that they were going to cancel the initial opening event of this 50-day siege of the White House. They were going to lay siege to the White House for 50 days. They've been out there in Black Lives Matter Plaza for weeks now, and they've been on loudspeakers, and they've been literally saying they're going to burn down the White House. They are going to they're going to tear Donald Trump out of the White House. All this violent rhetoric. But today on Twitter they put out that they were going to cancel the initial event that was supposed to be the big kickoff event they were going to have today because they have received so many death threats from white supremacists and militia groups and things like that. I don't know about that. Right here, Lafayette, his statue has been a focal point for their protests since the George Floyd thing, and they started tearing down all those statues and everything all across the country. They've worked on this one a lot to try to tear it down, and were unable to do so, but you can see now that the Park Service has put, or the Secret Service, somebody has put, these big metal fences around that statue. They've also placed those fences around any other structure in this park, to include the power substation back there, and even St. John's Church, which is right across the street. So it's surprisingly quiet here. I've stayed here for a couple days expecting that there would be a lot to cover, but it's empty. There's almost nobody here. And so again, the question is why? Well, like I say, they announced today that the reason was that there were white supremacist groups and groups that had been sending death threats and that sort of thing. But like I say, I don't know about that. What I would tend to believe is that they got a phone call from somebody in the Democratic committee saying, hey, ixnay on the protests, right? This is not a good look for us 50 days from the election to be burning down the White House, right? So we're just now starting to see politicians coming out and denouncing the violence on the Democratic side. They've been denouncing it on the Republican side since day one, but they were sort of tacitly facilitating these things on the Democratic side, hoping to be able to blame the violence on Donald Trump. That sort of backfired on them when Kenosha happened. It backfired on them starting in Minneapolis and on through. And unfortunately, the Democrats have started to figure out that they're being pegged with supporting things like criminals and looters and rioters, and not these, just protesters, that sort of thing. So you can see the White House there behind me. Since the last time I was here, I believe that they replaced this wrought iron fence with a bigger fence. Now, if you recall, in the riots after the George Floyd incident, that they had actually tried to tear down that fence, and about 60 Secret Service agents were injured in that melee. So they put up a stronger, thicker, taller fence, and they have these crowd control devices here separating, like 3 deep here, separating the park from the street, and they're not allowing people to get in there onto the street. Do you know how long that they've had these crowd control devices here? You have any idea?
Those look new. I haven't seen them recently.
Yeah, just a couple days, I think, that they've been here. But looks like they're really prepared for the worst, huh?
Well, worse hasn't come yet, has it?
Nope, sure hasn't. That's great. Thank heaven. So, the Secret Service and the Park Service have been preparing for this thing for days, and I've been here over the last couple days and watching those preparations take place. All this crowd control stuff is part of that. The fences were here when I got here, but they haven't been here for that long. They've just been here maybe a few weeks at most. So that sort of sets the tone, if you will, for the planned response to these announced 50 days of laying siege to the White House. And some of the advertising that was coming out about this siege of the White House was, well, all of it was very inflammatory. It was very violent. And then it sort of started to shift. In the last few days, it started to shift to, this is going to be a gathering of poets and jazz singers and people playing music. Again, I think that's because they started to realize that every day that they were down here rioting, they're making another campaign ad for Donald Trump. All he has to do is show these nightly riots, show the country on fire, and say, who do you think is going to make a bigger dent in this violence, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? And the polls started to show that people really thought that we needed more Donald Trump to put a stop to this. And whatever you think about that, that was what the polls were showing. So the company or the agency or whatever, this group behind this announced massive siege of the White House, and at one time they were talking about thousands of people being down here. It was all organized by the same group that organized the Occupy Wall Street protests back almost 20 years ago. And September 17th today was meaningful for them because it's supposed to be the anniversary of the beginning of the Occupy Wall Street protests. That organization is called Adbusters. Here's the interesting thing about that you're not going to hear in the news. Adbusters is not an American group. Adbusters is a group out of Canada. The founder of Adbusters is a Canadian Estonian guy, very liberal. Adbusters is a magazine, a print magazine that's been around for 2 decades or more. And it's kind of smells funny, if you ask me, that a Canadian organization would be trying to organize massive protests against Donald Trump. We talk about foreign influence in our elections. Well, what's that? I mean, if people are worried about the Russians and the Chinese trying to influence our elections through Facebook advertising and stuff like that, well, what about this? What about a giant protest right in front of the White House organized by Canadians? Now, I always thought Canadians were the nice North Americans, and indeed, especially in recent days, they've been calling for no violence. We don't want any violence here, and that sort of thing. But that wasn't what it looked like at the beginning. They were sending out quote-unquote tactical bulletins, talking about what they were going to do. Here they were showing imagery that showed the White House burning and things like that. And again, these groups, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and the like, don't have a reputation for being peaceable at all. They have a reputation for being hyper-violent. The Al-Qaeda of the United States And I think that there are a lot of similarities between Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're very fascistic. They say they're anti-fascist, but they're very fascistic. When they say they're anti-fascist, they're projecting fascism onto their enemies, but they themselves are very fascistic. They say they want to defund the police. They don't want to defund the police. They want to become the police. They want to take the power. They want to be able to tell people what to do and where to go. And I've seen that with my own eyes doing this. Right here is St. John's Church, the infamous this national treasure. This church is a national treasure and has been here for more than a century. The reason that it's got this giant fence around it is because these protesters have attempted to set it on fire multiple times. They've graffitied the front of this thing over and over again, even though the bishop in charge of this church is a liberal woman, ultra-liberal, who vehemently supports Black Lives Matter. That doesn't matter to them. You can see right here, she's got Black Lives Matter on the front of the bulletin board outside the church. Black Lives Matter right there. And so she's doing everything she can to placate them, to beg them not to burn her church by siding with them, trying to join them. It doesn't matter. These groups eat their own all the time. You can also see, this is the AFLCIO building back behind me. They've got a gigantic Black Lives Matter banner here facing the White House and facing Black Lives Matter Plaza. Again, in my experience, these organizations do this to try to buy off the protesters, to try to commiserate with the protesters and say, we're on your side, so please don't bust up our building, which is right on the street here where the rioting is going to take place. I talked to the doorman at the Hay Adams Hotel right over here on this side. Historic hotel from the 1920s, beautiful inside, $1,000 a night rooms, lots of history there, lots of heads of state have stayed there, obviously because it's so close to the White House right across the street. And he said it was absolutely terrifying in those initial riots that they had after the George Floyd incident, because they were trying to set fire to the place. They were spray painting the place. They were trying to break the windows. Everybody, all the employees were hiding inside. He said the doorman there is from El Salvador, and he said this was far scarier than anything I ever saw in El Salvador. That's pretty amazing. So over here, the next building over is the Ronald Reagan building, the Ronald Reagan Foundation and Institute. Obviously, that is all boarded up. That Ronald Reagan is not going to be very popular with the kind of people that are going to be demonstrating out here in Black Lives Matter Plaza. So they've had that boarded up for a long time. Again, they also have Black Lives Matter, plastered all over that building. The AFL-CIO building over here, Black Lives Matter plastered all over the plywood that they've got over their windows to keep them from being smashed. I'm walking on I don't know how much of that you can see, but I'm walking on the mural that was painted out here by Muriel Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C. That says Black Lives Matter in giant letters painted all down this street, which they now have closed. You wonder how far back they're going to have to push this. I remember about 10 years ago, probably during the Clinton administration, when they closed the road on the opposite side of the White House over there. I remember when that happened, and we all thought, well, that's really unfortunate that people can't even drive by the people's house anymore because it's too dangerous. These roads were all open. Now these roads are closed, pedestrian only, and we're talking for now, well, 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks away from the White House. And they just keep pushing it back and pushing it back because we're just not a civil society anymore, unfortunately. People are so emotional about politics these days that we've almost become two separate countries living in the same place that cannot occupy the same space. And I think that is the bigger problem. I'm going to walk back down here as we wrap up. I think the bigger problem, in my opinion, is not Black Lives Matter. Black lives will never matter until black people make them matter. I can't make Black Lives Matter. We don't have that power. The way that people make their lives matter is by doing things that matter. And painting giant murals on the street, that's not something that really makes a difference. People's lives are not going to be changed by that. What's going to change people's lives is love in people's hearts. When we start loving the people we meet, when we start showing people that we care about them, about each other, and that goes both directions. That's when, yeah. No thanks, I'm not into that kind of thing, but are you...
Yeah, we're just doing outreach work with DC shelters. I do this to reserve my bed, just raising tips for blankets, food, and hot meals. I ask, can you help us out with a small tip?
That's great. Gosh, I don't have any cash.
Oh, okay.
I don't really carry cash anymore.
Problem,
I'm sorry,
to
man.
hold you up, sir.
No problem.
Sorry to disturb you, sir.
God bless you.
God bless you.
You know, I've been approached by a lot of people asking for money since I've been here, and I just don't carry cash anymore. Who does? Who carries cash nowadays? I had one guy say, well, I take Venmo. Anyway, bottom line is, lives will only matter when people make them matter, and you don't make your life matter by tearing down other people's lives, by tearing down the work of other people's hands, or by tearing down their ideas. You do that by elevating your own, by taking the moral high ground. The moral high ground is not found in destroying the people with whom you disagree. Not in a polite society, not in a civil society. That's not how it works. And so, until people realize that, we're not going to see an end to this. Now, maybe tomorrow it will not be raining. Maybe tomorrow they'll get their act together and actually start having their siege of the White House. But for now, looks like the siege of the White House is a bust. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. I'm Chuck Holton for The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.